development in the post-colonial state of India. There is one philosopher you must have heard, Rousseau, J. Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher. He had made a distinction between natural and social equality. The natural inequality, it emerged from the unequal distribution of physical and mental abilities among the members of a society. But the social inequality, it arises from the social entitlement of the people to wealth, to economic resources, to political power, status. And you see, economic resources of the society, they vary according to the level of development and according to the structural features of the society. And also you see conventions, rules, customs, laws, they confer greater prestige and status on certain groups in the society. So in the human society, we witness social inequality in various forms. Also, another French scholar, Bourdieu, he employs terms like symbolic capital and distinction to identify social groups who enjoy more prestige and honor in the society. So various scholars, they have applied various types of yardsticks by which the people can be differentiated. Some people or some groups in society, they get more of prestige. They have better command over the resources of the society, and some others, they remain marginalized. And this list leads to unequal status. If we see, or if we say look to the Indian society, it's mostly caste ridden. Class concept actually हमारा western विशेषकर economic concept आसला विशेषकर Martian literature रे class ऊपर emphasize करागला, and it was mostly in the western world. We shall find that the class plays a very prominent role. In case of Indian society, this is caste ridden. That's the most contentious issue. One of the French scholars, whose name is Louis Dumont, he has written a famous book on caste, Homo Hierarchicus. The name of the book is Caste. On this caste system, he has written a very famous book, and the name is Homo Hierarchicus. And he has constructed a textually informed image of the caste. And there are two opposing conceptual categories of purity and pollution, which constitute the core element of the caste structure in our society. Louis Dumont, please remember, the famous book is Homo Hierarchicus. In ancient India, we have Varnashrama Dharma, different categories of people that have been placed in a hierarchical form, in a scalar way. Suppose highest position was given to the Brahmins, then Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras. And those who are not included in this caste structure, they are outcasts or ontarians. So, according to Dumont, the unique core principles are observed in scriptural formulation as well as in the everyday life of the Hindus. And for quite a sizable period of time, this caste structure had made our society static, unchangeable. And the persons who occupy the higher positions in the caste structure, they never want any change. Because any change will definitely hamper their prestige, which is mostly custom based. But this notion of caste, it has been challenged by Nicholas Dax and some other scholars. And Dumont's notion of caste was criticized by these scholars because they said that this notion of caste never explained the phenomenon of social change. And also, another scholar, Gerald Berman, he criticized Dumont's notion that power and economic factors are distinct to the caste. So now the question is, caste can be viewed as an invention of the colonial modernity, or it may be also viewed as a legacy of the Brahminical traditions. So these are two opposing viewpoints. One view is that it is the unchanged survival of the Brahminical tradition of India, which has prompted this caste structure. According to this view, Brahmanism represents a core civilizational value, and caste is the central symbol of the value. And this is the basic expression of the pre colonial traditions of India. And Nicholas Dark, he was written his famous writing, Castes of Mind. In 2001, he has written this, Castes of Mind. He argues that caste is a product of colonial modernity. And by this, he does not mean that caste did not exist before the advent of British. He's simply suggesting that caste became a single, unique category under the British rule, which expressed and provided the sole index of understanding India. So the British reduced everything to a single explanation through this and justify things through this structure of caste. It was the colonial state and its administrators who made caste into a uniform, all encompassing, and ideologically consistent organism. Of course, it was you have a familiar trend in India to downplay or dismiss the significance of the Brahmins or Brahminical dominance. Caste terms and principles were certainly not in universal use in pre-colonial periods. And caste in its various forms, it was also not an immutable entity. Starting from Vedas, the great epics, from Manu, ଯେଉଁମାନେ ମନୁଙ୍କର ପଢିଛନ୍ତି ମନୁ ସଂହିତା, he has justified caste structure. And also some other scriptures or dharma shastras of ancient India, the Puranas, from ritualistic practices. The working of this caste structure or caste system in an ancient society can be deciphered. But one thing is, caste is just not a fabrication of the British rulers designed to rule over the Indians by dividing the society. Caste also served the colonial interest by condemning the Brahminical tyranny. And another thing is, by strengthening the caste hierarchy, anarchy also can be fought. Anarchy can be stopped. So strengthening the caste hierarchy also act as a bulwark against anarchy, lawlessness. Because they say that caste hierarchy sometimes enforces discipline in the society. Anarchy is avoided. So caste in Indian society is quite ancient. It has existed even prior to the British rule. And Britishers also tried to exploit this particular system to their favor so that they can rule the society by dividing it on the principles of caste hierarchy. What about the, because more or less Indian society has experienced caste inequality. But what about the nature of class inequality? ଆପଣଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁମାନେ sociology ପଢିଛନ୍ତି, caste to class, there is distinction. Caste ର characteristics ଆପଣମାନେ ଅଳ୍ପ ବହୁତ ଜାଣିଛନ୍ତି that this is something which is related to a clan. I mean, it is a closed system. Somebody cannot change his caste identity. Because, for example, I inherit my caste identity from my parents. If a person is born to Brahmin parents, he is Brahmin. He is born to Shudra parents, he is a Shudra. If he is born to Kshatriyas, he is a Kshatriya. I mean, caste identity is something which is inbuilt, which is inborn, which is given from the time of birth. And there are other features like, it is endogamous. Usually in ancient societies, marital relationships, they were established inside the members of the same caste group. And of course, there are certain deviations like anuloma and pratiloma, which might have known so far as the sociological trends in our society is concerned. But what about the class identity? Class identity is more open. In caste hierarchy, mobility is not allowed, but in class, mobility is allowed because it is more or less Marxian concept. Economic concept ପ୍ରଥମେ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହୋଇଛି. Also, for Max Weber and others, some of the non-Marxians, they have also tried to interpret class in non-economic terms. But essentially, that is a Marxian concept. In Marxist terms, classes are defined by their differential access to the means of production and the dominant classes appropriate the surplus product. I mean, theory of surplus value ଆପଣ ଜାଣିଛନ୍ତି ଯେ ଯୋଉ କ୍ଲାସଟା means of production କୁ ନିଜ ଅକ୍ତିଆର ରଖିଲା, he dominates. So that is called the bourgeois class in the Marxian literature, and the others are proletariats, workers. And the worker section, the worker class, they dance to the tunes of the bourgeois because they are the owners of the productive forces. They are the owners of the means of production. The actual configuration of the social classes, it varies from one society to the other. And the rise and growth of Indian social classes, it is organically linked to the basic structure of colonialism. What constitutes the dominant proprietary class in the urban areas of India is marked by heterogeneity in its composition. A clear-cut demarcation along the lines of merchant, industrial, and finance capital is not possible in case of India, as it was in case of the industrial Western world. The Indian business classes exhibit a complex intervening function. The British capitalists and British merchants, they control the upper layer of the Indian economy. But in spite of the obstacles or restrictions, the Indian capitalist class grew slowly and steadily and embraced white collective monopoly. The monopoly by the foreigners. White collective monopoly. What about the class composition in the rural areas? In the rural areas of India, also There is impact of colonialism. The older group of rural gentry, particularly the older group, in case of the village areas, even though their wings are clipped, I mean their authority has been curtailed by the British colonial regime, they have been transferred to a new type of rentier class of landlords. It's a rural picture. Landlords, they operate in the rural as the rural gentry. ଯଦିଓ ବ୍ରିଟିଶର ମାନେ ସେମାନଙ୍କର ଆଧିପତ୍ୟକୁ କ୍ଷୁଣ୍ଣ କରିଥିଲେ, still then they have been invested with a newly defined property right to land. And this is especially true of permanently settled Zamindari areas of Bengal, Talukdari areas of Awadh. And the landlord rentier class generally emerged from the pre-existing groups of Zamindars and Talukdars. Those enjoyed the rights of revenue collection under the pre-British regime. And virtually, they exercised some sort of extra economic feudal coercion over the small marginal sharecroppers. However, the rich farmers, they're enumerated as the most important proprietary class in the rural areas. And also, these rich farmers numerically quite sizable. So the areas which are outside the Jamindari settled areas of Bengal, the colonial states settled land revenue with dominant cultivating groups. So this is a picture in the urban section and also in the rural section of the Indian society. Besides, reference also can be made to another type of elite class, that is bureaucratic managerial class. Bureaucratic elite class. The growth of non-market mechanisms and planning in the allocation of resources and economic patronage also resulted in the expansion of bureaucracy, officialdom. ତେଣୁ ବ୍ରିଟିଶ ସମୟର ବଡ଼ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରିବ୍ୟୁସନ ହେଉଛି ବ୍ୟୁରୋକ୍ରେସି, ଯୋଉଟାକି ଏପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ ମଧ୍ୟ ସେଇ ବ୍ୟୁରୋକ୍ରାଟିକ ଶାସନର କବ୍ଜା ଭିତରେ ଆମେ ବି ଏବେ ବି ଅଛେ. That constitutes a new type of managerial class. And this bureaucratic class, it expanded in the post-colonial phase with the spreading out of education and need for professional and white-collar jobs, which requires new skills, which requires expertise. ସେଥିପାଇଁ ବ୍ୟୁରୋକ୍ରାସିର ଡୋମିନାନ୍ସଟା ରହିଲା, because that is a particular office section ଯୋଉମାନେ କି ବିଭିନ୍ନ ସ୍କିଲ୍କୁ, ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଏକ୍ସପର୍ଟାଇଜକୁ ନିଜର ଅକ୍ତିଆରକୁ ଆଣିଥିଲେ. By the way, they became indispensable. So, bureaucratic class became significant because of their command over knowledge, because of their command over skills, and also because of the networks of relationship. Bureaucracy ro member ka bhitere relationship is very strong. So they operate because of their close association with each other. That's why they dominate. These are the notable features of bureaucracy. So that constitutes another new class. And another important and very interesting feature shall be, what about the relationship of caste and class? In प्रकार aspect western society रे बहुत कम, कारण caste structure टा प्राय western world रे नहीं, अल्प बहुत. Of course there are some rudiments of caste structure in Portuguese society, some sociologists say, but in our case both castes are there, which are prevalent from the ancient days, and also class structure has come up. So what type of relationship exists between the caste and class is very interesting, because both the things, they are the basis of inequality. Both this caste and class, they serve as the basis of social hierarchy. Hierarchy माने बुझछन तो lower stratum to top stratum पर्यंत जो सजा होता है, it is ladder type of structure, hierarchical structure. Some people are bound to be in the top, then some people must be in the lower rungs of the ladder. That is the hierarchy. I have already told you that जाति प्रथार किसी कोर प्रिंसिपल होची एंडोग्रामी और मैरिज विद इन द कास्ट, occupational differentiation and hereditary specialization of occupation. कारण धरंतु ब्राह्मण माने जजमानी करथिले, तेणु तांकर occupational expertise ता जजमान बा पुरोहित इरे रहुतला. सेमती धर a person born to the Brahmin also is doing the same thing. Think of other, for example, a Kshatriya. The occupational function is defense, to protect the society. So Brahmins, they are performing the activities like priesthood. Kshatriyas, there is the warrior section. Vaishyas, they are mostly the mercantile section or business people. And Sudras, they are mostly providing different types of services. That means what? Occupation was related to the caste. It is never true in case of the class. And also in the modern system of caste structure, a Brahmin did not go for priesthood. A Kshatriya necessarily is not joining the army. Or son of a carpenter is not necessarily a carpenter. He can seek jobs of his liking or of his own skill. But these features are present in the traditional structures. After intercaste marriage as a trend has come up in the society, this system of endogamy is no more there. Not necessarily that marriage takes within the caste, but it was the feature of the ancient caste structure. So after the emergence of class, the traditional relationship, it has undergone a change. Classes they broadly refer to economic basis of ownership or non-ownership. କାରଣ କ୍ଲାସଟା ଗୋଟେ ଏସେନ୍ସିଆଲି ଗୋଟେ ମାର୍କସିଷ୍ଟ କନସେପ୍ଟ ଥିଲା। If I own the means of production, I belong to the rich class. And not only that, there is a mobility. जे पुअर है कि जो पुअर सेक्शन रे रही छै अर्थनीति से सबले पुअर है कि रहइबो by dint of his hard labor he can acquire more of wealth and he can identify himself with the rich class. So classes are subdivided in terms of types of ownership, control of economic resources, and the type of services contributed to the process of production. So these are the essential distinctions, but still then, caste and class also resemble in certain ways. They also resemble in certain ways. And also differ in, as we have seen, class is not endogamous. Class is one economic, mostly the basis is economic. And there is the concept of mobility. A person can change his class identification. But in case of the caste identity is something static, rigid, structure rigid. You can't change your own caste identity. So caste and class resemble in some ways and also they differ in many ways. Castes constitute the status groups of communities that can be defined in terms of ownership of property, occupation, and style of life. Social honor is closely linked to the ritual values in its closed system. The classes are much more open, fluid, dynamic. So one can have a upward mobility in the class structure. In the closed system, caste is a closed system. କାରଣ ଗୋଟେ କାଷ୍ଟର ଲୋକ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ କାଷ୍ଟକୁ ଅପୱାର୍ଡ ମୋବିଲିଟି କରିପାରୁନଥିଲା। ସପୋଜ ଶୂଦ୍ରରେ ବୈଶ୍ୟରେ କ୍ଷେତ୍ର cannot identify themselves as Brahmins. So although there is considerable divergence between the hierarchy of caste and of class, the top and bottom segments of the caste system, they are largely subsumed under the caste structure. Sociological observation very interesting ସେମାନେ କରିଛନ୍ତି। the upper caste ଲୋକମାନେ means of production ଟାକୁ ବେଶୀ ଅକ୍ତିଆରକୁ ନେଇଛନ୍ତି। So in most cases upper caste members they have become also rich class plus ସେମାନେ means of production ଟାକୁ ନିଜ ଅକ୍ତିଆରକୁ ଆଣିଛନ୍ତି। The landless agrarian proletarian coincide with the lower caste. ଏବଂ lower caste ଲୋକମାନେ ନିମ୍ନ ଜାତିର ଲୋକମାନେ ବିଶେଷ କରି they are the tillers, they are the landless agrarian and the farmers. So they constitute the proletarian class according to Marx. So this is a very strange relationship. And at the intermediate level, articulation of the class identification is more complex. So if the caste and class show a fair degree of overlapping at the top and bottom levels, and in some cases appear almost co-terminus. The picture is quite ambiguous at the intermediate level of caste hierarchy. Similarly, think of the process of modernization, especially urbanization, acquisition of education, the acquisition of new skills. They act as the forces of dislocation, which functions the forces of social inertia. And it has also modified the caste rigidity. So socialists like MN and others, they have also analyzed the trends like Sanskritization, etc., where the members of the lower class groups in India, particularly in South India, they have tried to emulate the lifestyle of the upper caste members. Of course, by that way, they are not going to lose their caste identity, but at least some of the moods, social customs of the upper caste members can be internalized by them. So this is some sort of a mobility. Rigid caste system certain changes. So whatever it may be, in case of Indian society, if the social inequalities are so deeply entrenched, then how do they affect the developmental process and participation of the deprived section of the society in a democratic polity like India? That is the main issue. And this question has been answered in different ways. Rajani Kothari, for example, while analyzing the influence of caste into politics, ଆପଣ ଦେଖିବେ ବହୁତ या ଭିତରେ रिसर्च आर्टिकल्स କରାଯାଇଛି caste politics in India. ରଜନୀ କୋଠାରୀ ବିଶେଷ କରି ତାପରେ ବହୁତ କାମ କରିଛନ୍ତି that how caste has influenced the political participation, the political trends of country. And various political parties, they try to galvanize the support of the dominant caste members. So concept of dominant caste, it has come up. Suppose in a particular constituency, a particular caste is dominant in number, because democracy is a number game. So the parties shall try to field the candidates of that particular caste which is dominant, and by that way they can have more of votes. So Indian polity is thus governed by vertical mobilization by the dominant caste and also horizontal alliances in the name of Jati and Varna. For example, you see the rich, prosperous farmers, they use the existing social networks in the multi-class agrarian mobilization in the electoral arena to mobilize and harness marginal and small farmers for their own economic interest. So even though in post-independence period, we have pursued egalitarian ideals, there are still disproportionate access to resources, access to power, and entitlements between different social classes and castes. Constitution legal arrangements प्रत्येक कास्ट बा क्लास ग्रुप रो मेंबर्स माने से माने इक्वल एक्सेस टू अथॉरिटी, टू पावर, टू रिसोर्सेस को मध्य एंटाइटल ही पर नांती. Still distinctions, differences exist. Andre Berkeley has very sharply remarked that professionalization and specialization of modern service sector in the post-colonial Indian society has increased the role of formal education, technical skills and training. Family and non-caste, here please remember, caste is no more playing important role, rather family and not the caste plays critical role in the social reproduction of inequality, especially in urban areas. So ଆମେ democracy ପାଇଁ ଯେତେ formal institution को establish କଲେ भी, that is no guarantee that social equality can be removed, or we cannot guarantee that all the citizens of the country can have the equal access to the economic resources or political power. So post-colonial India accepted the formal principles of equality and social justice in its governance. But however, no social entity exists in a vacuum. The functioning of our democratic polity is profoundly and unfairly influenced by the caste and also class-based inequality. That is a fact. Then another interesting subject related to this is political economic development. You know, poverty, unemployment, disease, squalor, frequent disasters, natural disasters, crime, they are openly visible. But they vary widely in different parts of the world, including India. No part of the globe is entirely free from these problems. In over two-thirds of the world, billions of human beings constituting the global majority face this grim life, this grim fate. And even in rich and high-income countries like the countries which are the part of OECD, they also have pockets of extreme poverty. They are also facing problems of unemployment. So statistics about the vast disparities which are rampant in India are available, even though not authoritatively. However, some idea of prevailing disparities can be gleaned from some well-known facts about India. For one thing, agriculture continues to remain the main source of livelihood so far as our country is concerned. You know, the absolute number of people dependent on agriculture is now nearly 3 times the number which was dependent on agriculture at the time of independence. In spite of some productivity gains, the comparative position of the vast majority of cultivators, of whom 80% they are small and marginal farmers with non-viable tiny plots of land, inadequate limited access to the resources, it has become still, it has been worsened. And discrimination of the Dalits and the tribal communities still persists, and they constitute the lowest rung of Indian. It's a highly differentiated and stratified social order. You know, the income is related to the market-centric activities, but many critical and important activities, including those connected with material aspects and veering on well-being, social role, and esteem, they are non-market activities. And these non-market activities have little to do with this income flow. Then market does not incorporate everyone, and market differentiates people on non-functional, unjust criteria, and it excludes a large number of people from varying lengths from time from participation in of activities and transaction. So the present scenario is that the market is prone to manipulation by some against the interest of many. So market mechanism, it operates in such a way that it leads to exploitation by the few over many. Some examples also you can find that the market process of generating income flows tend to benefit some at the cost of the others. For example, the use of natural resources like land, water, forest in the process of production can deprive some of their livelihood without any or inadequate compensation. Thus, market generated income, it conceals its hidden as well as the non-monetary costs. Market generated income based on comparison take a highly limited and truncated view of life or the truncated view of society and also of the future. And it tends to be highly myopic, narrow based. The national income aggregates and averages take the nation as a unit, as if it was internally a single undifferentiated entity without internal dynamics or internal differentiations. Nations like our country, they have vast internal differentiations in terms of control over and access to and quality of social, economic, and cultural resources, as well as in terms of status and power. The historical experiences too shows many different patterns of ups and downs. Income flows may be generated by production, either on or on ad hoc basis, and they are made available by means of a transfer, even with a guarantee measure of regularity in many different ways. But in this process, those who disperse income to dominate, and recipients, they get dominated and subordinated. India suffers year after year when it sends high-ranking officials to what used to be known as Aid India Club, for example, in order to win the approval of the so-called donor countries in exchange for their commodities and also their commitments to provide some development assistance in the form of official development assistance, ODA, which has been small fraction of India's development outlays. So the point is that, though useful to a limited extent, international income comparisons, whether for the present or for long historical periods, they're quite inadequate to define the essential question and problems of the political economy of development. You know, it follows that GDP in various forms is not only an overly quantified indicator, but is also a highly imperfect, imprecise, incomplete, biased indicator. And it basically it camouflages the interest of the big international capital dominating the rich industrialized countries. And this is because of the process of capital accumulation, the process of industrialization, along with consequential social relations and international relations. And this process, it excludes and marginalizes a much large number than the number they incorporate and empower in the bargain. And the tendency that the majority depends on the minority, it perpetuates. So Indian experience of modern industrialization, both during the colonial period and the post-independence era, clearly shows that the share of industry in both the GDP and in the workforce, it remains a small fraction not only of the age-old agriculture, but also of the rapidly expanding service sectors. There is a clear recognition of the inability of the growth cum poverty reduction policies to realize the potential opened up by the scientific and technological revolution, resource availability, and the basic humanistic value structure. The basic question facing the development theories now is that in spite of the 2 centuries of modern economic growth based on industrial revolution of various vintages and over half a country of highly mobilized national and international endeavors, fairly limited positive and also perverse anti-development outcomes they have not obtained. Generally, the development theories have been addressed to those who can or ought to intervene for organizing or accelerating development. And it means national and subnational government, market entities, national and international formally organized groups, generally called what you know, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and what better treated as civil society institutions, they're expected to respond to and to make use of the development theories. So the political economy of development requires that in addition to state and market, it should also address the entire range of civil society institutions and should not remain focused exclusively on the state or markets or NGOs. The entire range of institutions must be addressed. So it is always a fallacy to identify political economy of development with collectivism or neglect of individuals. Of course, PD does discard methodological individualism, which treated the real and legal persons as autonomous operating entities. So, compared to the mainstream economic theories of development, the political economy development takes a rigorous, deep-rooted view of genesis, accentuation, and perpetuation of the adverse but avoidable state of affairs. The theories of development have to find common ground in the midst of this diversity so that theories can become applicable to each one of these specific situations. So the theories of development are concerned equally with the fate and status and functioning of the people, of the institutions, and values in the rich as well as the poor countries. You know, this there is also reference so far as this political economy development is concerned to the international capital flows, then capital accumulation and its role and limitations. Because no direct result of identifying economic growth with the growth of output was the assignment of the critical development and industrialization role to capital accumulation. And many consider the relative inadequate provisions or inadequacies of the capital stock and slow growth of capital formations as the main cause of low income, poverty, and backwardness. In this context, the role of the state is most important. The political economic development critique of the conventional development economies, it goes beyond a critical examination of the policy variable of capital accumulation. In development economies, in the first half of 1970s, there was little and difference of opinion concerning the key and leading catalyst, entrepreneurial role of the state in energizing, directing, and even directly conducting the process of capital accumulation, industrialization, and economic growth. So, in the broad parameters of active statist development policy, there are, of course, differences of emphasis, nuances, choice of agencies, instruments, and organizational forms, and their relationship with the various domestic and external social and economic groups. So, briefly speaking, this study shows the limitation of capital accumulation and the FDI inflows, that is foreign direct investment flows, as a means of growth. The liberalization, privatization, and globalization package suggested by the International Monetary Fund and World Bank for battling the poor and economic out of their crisis resulted in a big retreat of the state and disenchantment. A political economy approach cannot stand for a development paradigm which restricts people free choice and cannot have a predetermined universal pattern of development. Then what about the structural growth of economy? That is poverty, surplus and unevenness. These chapters mostly deal with the economic aspects of development. You know, in Indian economy, for example, in the 1990s, with the advent of globalization, there has been a marked structural transformation. The intersectoral composition of the GDP, that is gross domestic product, it underwent significant change. The services sectors, it has come to occupy a place of prominence. There is considerable variation in the performance of the individual states, with some states growing faster than the average and others slightly slower. So the degree of dispersion growth rates across states increased very significant in the 1990s. The differences in performance across various states become even more marked when we allow for the differences in the rates of growth of population and evaluate the performance in terms of growth rates of per capita SDP. The increased variation in growth performances across the states in 90s reflects the fact that whereas growth accelerated for the economy as a whole, it actually de-accelerated sharply in the states like Bihar, UP, and Odisha, all of which had relatively low rates of growth to begin with. And there are also comparatively poorer states. So it is important to note that high growth performance in 1990s, they were not concentrated in one part of the country. The 6 states with growth rates of STP in the 1990s above 6% year per year, they are fairly well distributed regionally. For example, Gujarat and Maharashtra in the west, West Bengal in the east, Tamil Nadu in the south, and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan in central part or and northern part of the country. Defining poverty and poverty line is another crucial issue. Government of India has set up an expert group to suggest a methodology to measure poverty, and that group submitted its report in 1993 and suggested a new poverty line of rupees 49 and rupees 56 for the rural and urban areas respectively at 1973 and 74 prices. So the availability of an absolute poverty line allows comparisons across countries. Over the last decade, so the availability of an absolute poverty line, it allows the comparisons across the countries. Over the last decade, most comparisons of international poverty line have been made by the World Bank, and the definition used in a purchasing power. The most widely used measure of poverty in India is the head count ratio. These are all technical economic terms. Head count ratio, HCR. This is a measure of income poverty. In early 1960s, the government of India appointed a special working group of eminent economists to assess the level of poverty in India. So you shall find also from various texts the trends in poverty ratio. For example, between 1951 and mid 1970s, income poverty reduction saw no discernible trend. In 1951, 47% of India's rural population was below the poverty line. Between 1970s and 1980s, the 70s, the decline was more pronounced between 1977 78 and 1987-88, with rural income poverty declining from 53% to 39%. This is all data which you can find from the text and statistics. But after 1991, the post-economic reform period, which witnessed progress and setbacks, the rural income poverty increased from 34% to 43% in 1992. So the differences in growth performance of the individual states, they have important implications for poverty reduction. The state level shows that the states experienced a decline in poverty over the 10-year period, with only Two exceptions, Bihar and Haryana, both of which showed an increase. And in India, no one has done more to bring objectivity to this debate than Dr. Surjit Wala of Oxford Research. And according to him, economic reforms initiated in 1991 have led to a radical transformation in the well-being of the bottom half of the population. And growth helps to reduce poverty because of three central reasons. It creates jobs that pull up the poor into gainful employment by providing more economic opportunity. Then also it provides the revenue with which we can build more schools, provide more health activities for the poor section of the society. And the third reason is it creates the incentive that enable the poor to access these facilities and also for the advancement of progressive social agenda generally. You know, the overwhelming attention paid to measuring and monitoring income poverty, it has resulted in a gross neglect of other serious forms of human deprivation. And what are those the other types of deprivations? They are found and visible: child labor, illiteracy, damaged environment. These are also some deprivation. So side by side with poverty, these problems also should be tackled. So these are many forms of deprivation which are silent and invisible. And those invisible and silent forms of deprivations are issues of women health, domestic violence, child malnutrition. And these deprivations are not related to income poverty levels. So income levels often fail to capture deprivation along other dimensions of human life. Of course, it doesn't mean to say that income does not matter. It does. But people often value other things in life more than income. Hence, poverty reduction not by income alone. Income matters, but still then people often value other things in life much more than income. Even to the very poor, self-respect and a good reputation means a lot of the people. So they often articulate their immediate needs as a good education for their children, access to good health. So to most of the people also sometimes to be treated with dignity and respect, it matters more than income. So income definitely is one important factor, but besides, these are the other factors. So poverty reduction not alone by income, because there are other forms of deprivation other than poverty which can be tackled by other measures. So the Indian economy, it has been marked structural transformation in 1990s with the service sectors occupying a place of prominence and agriculture seeing a decline. And the economy maintained a high GDP growth The major impetus coming from the manufacturing and service sectors. The objective of India's development strategy is the eradication of mass poverty, but while the percentage show a decline in poverty, absolute numbers of poor has increased because of our earning population rise. So there is a clear linkage between rapid growth and poverty alleviation. Poverty in India is largely a rural phenomenon, as more than 80% of India's poor live in rural areas. So India needs to strike a balance in development in its economic and social front, with the state playing a more proactive role. Mostly these two chapters are heavily loaded with economic terms, economic implications, and economic analysis. Then let us come to another very interesting topic, more or less related to the political trend and the political institution, that is legislature. I think you all, being the students of politics, must be more or less comfortable with this chapter that is on legislature. You know, modern nation states, they seek political power to govern by the process of legitimacy, and this is attributed to it by its citizens. And political power is one essential instrument of the state. One state therefore has undergone structural differentiations in form of legislature, executive, and judiciary. I think you shall be more comfortable with these terms because you more or less know these terms and how government operates through these institutions: law making, law executing, and adjudication. So there are three distinct branches of the government: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Legislature is often used as a synonym of parliament. You know, this term is derived from a Latin term lex, which means legal rules. Lex. So through legislation, which is the most fundamental task, the government operates through rules, law making. Legislatures in the classic scheme of government were the law making bodies. And today, it is associated with the various functions besides law making also. And it has undergone a phenomenal change. In India, particularly post-colonial India, after independence, it began its journey of democracy and political development since 1952. But you know, this legislature was existent prior to independence. Britishers have initiated the Indians into this, and they have made the people acquainted with this institution of legislature. So prior to independence also, we are very much acquainted with this institution of legislature. Vyavasthapaka. I mean, that also vyavastha, to make law. You know, as early as 1833, during the colonial government, in the British rule, a conceptual distinction was made between executive and legislative functions of the Governor General Council. And with the introduction of the Indian Councils Act of 1861, there was both gradual expansion of the legislative tasks entrusted to the legislative councils and a progressive incorporation of natives into the legislative machinery. Then you must have heard about Parliament reforms in 1909. In that reform also there is provision to enlarge the Imperial Legislative Council. And also an element of election was introduced in the Imperial Legislative Council. So virtually this legislative councils, they have been assigned with deliberative functions to deliberate, means discuss, to think, make rules. The deliberative function of these legislative councils are also increased. And for the first time, a separate electorate for the Muslim community was established. The establishment of British opinion had begun to change by the end of the First World War. And after in 1919 also must be knowing that another reforms has come, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. It introduced substantive changes. Parliament reform ଅପେକ୍ଷା Montagu-Chelmsford ଆହୁରି substantive changes ଆସିଥିଲା. It brought further legislative reforms in form of responsible government in the provinces through devolution rules and diarchy, Dvaita Sasana, diarchy. So Indian legislature was made representative. It was made bicameral, means two house. There are two house, and elected majority was introduced in both the houses. Another major reform took place also by the introduction of Government of India Act 1935. Oh, these are very common things for you because you are all students of political science since your first days, graduation and all that. You must be knowing that parliamentary reforms, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Then another milestone is Government of India Act 1935, which provided, among others, federation and provincial autonomy, hierarchy at the center, distribution of the legislative powers between the center and the provinces, and 6 provincial legislatures, they were made bicameral. These are the provisions of 1935 Act. In December 1946, जो हम देखिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली आरंभ होला, संविधान प्रणयन सभा, the task was to frame new constitution. It was convened to work on the principle of constitutional autonomy and provide the structural arrangement of the state power. So Constituent Assembly had made arrangements for the establishment of the independent legislature for independent India. So now India would have its own legislatures. The Government of India Act of 1947 further made it clear by abolition of the sovereignty and responsibility of British Parliament. So with the passing of this act, that is Government of India Act, British sovereignty was gone. We have been made free. The Constituent Assembly, therefore, framed the legislative provisions of the Constitution with the aim of creating a basis for the social and political unity of the country. And partition had made this task difficult, of course. The reason all this happened during the period of partition. The legislature in India, it is, I am now talking about the broad structure. Within the parliamentary system, is the totality of the central, state, and local legislatures. The central legislature, which is called the parliament, it has two houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. The state legislature shall include governor, two houses, the legislative assembly and legislative council in some states. Because in all the states, council is not there. Very few states now they are having this legislative council. For example, in Odisha, there is no legislative council. We have only assembly. Then also, we have some local legislatures like Gram Sabha, municipality, Panchayat Raj system, local self-government. So, for the purpose of legislation, the Constitution introduces a federal system as the basic structure of the government, wherein there is a threefold distribution of subjects between the center and states. କାରଣ ଆପଣମାନେ ଅଳ୍ପ ବହୁତ ଜାଣିଛନ୍ତି 7th schedule legislative relation between the center and the state. Union list, state list, concurrent list. So the parliament is to make law only on the items included in the union list. And the state legislature shall make law only on the items included in the state list. So far as the concurrent list is concerned, both center and state legislatures, they can make law. But in case of conflict, it is the central government or the union government which must prevail. You know, already if the union government has made a law on one item or on a subject in the concurrent list, the state legislature must make a law according to the spirit of the union law. It should not contradict. So in case of the central government, for example, it's called parliament. President of India is also an integral part of the legislature because he also participates in lawmaking. So he is also the part of Indian parliament like Crown of England. Or because you know in case of England also their crown. So it's called king in parliament. You must have heard of this phrase, king in parliament. However, the Indian president differs from the crown of England in respect of its power. That is, certain discretionary powers like legislation and administering of the oath. Then the constitution vests the power of carrying the business of government in the president, but the president exercises his power under certain limitations. For example, you must be knowing Article 74, Clause 1, that the executive powers shall be exercised by the President of India in accordance with the advice of his Council of Ministers. And Article 53, Clause 1 demands that the President must exercise his power according to the Constitution. The President represents the nation and is the symbol of unity and integrity of the nation. So it is in this sense that he is the head of the state. So A harmonious correlation between the president and various legislative institutions. It has led to a sort of successful working of the parliamentary democracy in India. For example, president and prime minister, real and nominal head. We say president is the nominal head, whereas the legal powers they lie with the prime minister and his council of ministers. So a healthy relationship between the two indicates the good working of the parliamentary democracy. But the relationship is unhealthy, it can indicate the problematic in the legislative issues and it will unleash various complications in governance. It has two houses, parliament has two houses, you must be knowing, Lok Sabha and also Rajya Sabha. Our parliament is bicameral. The lower house is Lok Sabha, is a popularly elected chamber because people are directly they're sending their representatives, the MPs, member of parliaments, on the basis of universal adult suffrage. Every adult citizen above 18 years is entitled to vote, other than, of course, non-residents, the insane criminals, those who have been convicted of corruption or corruption in electoral practices, they are excluded. In a reserved constituency, only members of the scheduled caste and tribes may contest, but all adults within the constituency may vote. In a reserved constituency, only members of that particular reserved category they can contest, but all the people residing inside the constituency can exercise their vote. Besides, there is a provision for two nominated members from the Anglo-Indian society. So the president can nominate two members from the Anglo-Indian community. He feels that that community is inadequately represented in parliament. So there is a system of single member constituency. This system has produced governments that have substantial majorities in the parliament. A proportional reservation system would have been fairer and it would have been more representative. By and large, parliament is fairly chosen with the help of the constitutional body called the Election Commission, because the Election Commission is the apex body which conducts the election to the parliament and also the election to the state legislatures. The term of Lok Sabha is for a period of 5 years. Of course, in an emergency, this may be extended to 1 year at a time independently. While the parliament may be dissolved and fresh elections held because the government has lost the confidence of the House, the more common occurrence is for a prime minister to time a call for fresh election. So these provisions are very much there in the constitution. So the Lok Sabha is required to convene itself twice a year according to the provisions of the constitution. At least 2 sessions should be there, with maximum allowable period of gap of the session being 6 months. Dita session with maximum 6 months gap, not more than that. So 2 in the year it must be convened for 2 times. There is a very elaborate process of lawmaking, which you must be very much acquainted in your Indian constitution books. That the passing of the bill, yes, The process of legislation, it involves three stages. The introduction of the bill. The first reading consists of the bill being introduced by a member who can explain the aims and objectives of this bill. And after the second reading, a bill may be referred to select committee. Committee stage of the both. Committees are very, they are like the hands and limbs of the parliament. And also, at the second reading stage, a bill may be circulated for public response, or it can be taken up with immediate consideration. So there are three options. It can be referred to a select committee, or it may be circulated for public response, or it may be taken up with immediate consideration. Usually the last course is very rare and reserved for urgent items. And immediate consideration by take up करिबा जो option था very rare. Only in case of urgencies that can be done. The second course is the most frequent. The select committee reports back either unanimously or with a majority recommendation and a minority note of dissent. The bill is then considered in the House clause by clause, with other members being able to introduce. The sessional or daily business of the government is decided by the cabinet. Its Parliamentary Affairs Committee under the chairmanship of the Chief Whip. Each session of the Lok Sabha is opened with a presidential address, and the quorum of the Lok Sabha to be able to meet is 1/10 of its membership. The House also elects its speaker who presides over the meetings. He conducts the business of the House. The speaker may not vote on an issue before the Lok Sabha, but he exercises the casting vote in case of tie. ଯେକୌଣସି ଧର ବିଲ୍ ସପକ୍ଷ ବିପକ୍ଷ ଯଦି ସମାନ ସଂଖ୍ୟକ ଭୋଟ ହୁଏ ସେ ସମୟରେ the speaker is allowed the casting vote. It is a deciding vote. Parliament is the central forum for amending the constitution under Article 368. Procedure of amendment of Article 368. And Parliament being the highest legislative body can amend the constitution. But which persons the Parliament must amend? Essentially, any other person can be amended, but so long as the fundamental right chapter is concerned, it is a long run history. And there are a number of judicial pronouncements by Supreme Court so far as power of amending chapter 3 by the Parliament is concerned. There are a number of cases like I.C. Goloknath versus State of Punjab, Minerva Mills case, Kesavananda Bharati State of Kerala. But finally, in the Supreme Court judgment, Parliament has been given the right, the authority to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights. Actually, I.C. Goloknath case, the verdict was different. It was in favor of the individual. But in Kesavananda Bharati, it was in favor of the Parliament. The Parliament has for the authority to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights. Of course, there is a condition without changing its basic nature. କିନ୍ତୁ କନଷ୍ଟିଟ୍ୟୁସନର ବେସିକ୍ ନେଚରକୁ ଆଫେକ୍ଟ ନ କରିକି ସେ ହିଁ ଚେଞ୍ଜଟା କରିପାରିବ. You know what are the basic structures of the constitution? There are a lot of texts on that which you practically know. For example, the secular polity is a basic structure. The parliamentary form of government is a basic structure. Each basic structure টাକୁ amendment ବଳରେ change କରିପାରିବ. Otherwise, it can amend. ବିଶେଷ କରି right to property, for your information, was the right on which this a number of cases were fought in Supreme Court, because that was the right which provides space for cases between the individual and the state. So till the decision of Kesavananda Bharati, all cases were in favor of the individual. That right to property of the individual is sacrosanct and must be protected, and Parliament cannot take it away. But you know, by the way, what happened? State has entered into welfareism, period of welfareism. So in order to establish a socialistic form of society, the state had to take a number of decisions or legislations or laws which may interfere in the right to property of the individual. Otherwise, socialistic pattern is not possible. So what really happened? Right to property has really served as an obstacle. It hampered the process of socialistic legislations on the part of the government. But finally, it so happened that Parliament, by law, has abolished right to property granted under Article 31. You know, fundamental right, Article 31 is no more there. Now, right to property is only one ordinary right. It is no more fundamental right. Kind of fundamental right, state cannot take it away. Enforceability. If a right to property is otherwise, how citizens can have their own property? But it is there as a ordinary right. It is non-fundamental. It is no more a fundamental right. So, fundamental right guaranteed under Article 31, which was included in Part 3 of the Constitution, was abolished. So, Lok Sabha is the most important chamber and popularly elected chamber. The other house, the lower house is called, lower house is Lok Sabha. The upper house is called Rajya Sabha or Council of States. And comparatively, Rajya Sabha has a importance wise slightly lower. But you know, in certain matters, Rajya Sabha has got equal rule also with Lok Sabha. Rajya Sabha has equal role and status to that of Lok Sabha in electoral college for choosing president, members of state legislative assemblies elect Rajya Sabha representatives for their states on a proportional representation system. When a particular law, a bill passed by Lok Sabha goes to Rajya Sabha for its concurrence, but Rajya Sabha does not concur, doesn't agree. In that case, there is a provision of joint sitting. In the joint sitting, there is a bill discussed with, and it is put to vote. Usually, Lok Sabha wins, because numerically Lok Sabha is higher. When you vote, the proposals or the legislation being initiated by Lok Sabha was actually given consent. I mean, because it is numerically, because it's a numerically stronger house. So virtually, Lok Sabha can make a particular legislation passed in the joint sitting also, because it is numerically higher. Its strength is higher. So since Lok Sabha MPs outnumber the Rajya Sabha counterparts by more than, it's like 2:1. In a combined sitting, the Rajya Sabha can generally expect to be defeated. But besides, a money bill ଗୁଡ଼ାକ ରାଜ୍ୟସଭାରେ ଇନିସିଏଟ୍ ହେଇପାରିବ ନାହିଁ. ଲୋକସଭା only can initiate money bills, but non-money bills can be initiated in both the houses. One thing is that Rajya Sabha, it acts as a check, and it has also certain special powers. जोटाक आपने अल्प बहुत जानते, like as far as abolition of all India service, creating new all India services. And when the two or more states, they combinedly make a request that one item on the state list can, I mean, legislation can be made, or a law can be made by the parliament. It can be done only on the approval of the Rajya Sabha. Creation of special all India services, news all India services, or abolition. These are certain important exclusive powers of Rajya Sabha. So, in respect of certain specified federal features of the Constitution, the primary amending role has been given to Rajya Sabha as the custodian of state rights. For example, the powers of Rajya Sabha itself can be altered only with the consent of 2/3 majority in the upper house. So whatever it may be, these are the cordial relationship of both the houses is, it can only lead to healthy parliamentary democracy and all. Then some reference can be given to committees. I have already told you that committees are the hands and limbs of the parliament. And Lok Sabha operates with the aid of parliamentary committees. And the composition of the committee is determined by the Speaker and the Chief Whip with the due regard to respective party strength in the House. Some of the important committees you must have heard, like Public Accounts Committee, Estimates Committee, Committee of the Whole House, like that. There are many important committees. So they act as the watchdog in the parliament to ensure culture of accountability and good governance. And the financial committees like PSC or Estimates Committee, they're the most important ones. And another important part is the role of opposition. Opposition in a parliamentary democracy is expected to play the role of an alternative government. It is a watchdog. It can check the misuse of power by the party which forms the government. Opposition parties, they do register and express the diversity of opinion in a country as large and varied India. India has multiple problems and various sections, various interest groups, they have come up. Their interests can be ventilated, their grievances can be ventilated by the opposition parties in the parliament. So, opposition play a very, very vital role in parliamentary formalities. Then, with few minutes, I can think I will speak about the state legislatures. Virtually, state legislatures, they also function in the similar patterns like parliament, but very few states have two chambers. But most of the states in including Odisha, we have no legislative council. Hello, hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Hello, hello.
Yes, sir.
So now there is some connectivity problem. Okay, only 3 4 minutes are left, and I shall wind up. So state legislatures also operate on similar lines, but only few states are having they're having the second chamber, that is the legislative council, and for a long time there is a debate going on between parliamentary supremacy and judicial supremacy. But in most of the decisions, including Kesavananda Bharati, the Supreme Court ruled that while Parliament could amend even the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and the 42nd Amendment Act unambiguously declared the Parliament to be competent to amend all the provisions of the Constitution, and this definitely has indicated the towards parliamentary supremacy. So in a democracy, state plays a crucial role in maintaining order and reconciling the conflicts in a civil society. And the modern state, in the form of three important bodies like legislature, executive, and judiciary, tries to accomplish the political goals of the society. And the lawmaking body, that is the legislature, contributes to achieving the goals embedded in the preamble of the Constitution. So, our parliament and the state legislature, being the legislative bodies of the union government and also state governments, they play a very, very pivotal role in establishing a welfare society in our country. So all the important legislations, considering the needs and aspirations of the people, can be taken up by this legislative organ of the state. So that is why legislature has assumed a very, very important role in the modern state in spite of the trend of executivism. Because some people say that the modern state is one executive state. Executive assign is getting more importance. In spite of that, legislature plays a very, very pivotal and important role in modern state. And also in case of India, our parliament and the state legislatures definitely are contributing towards achieving the goals which are embedded in the preamble of our constitution. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, participants. I think my discussion is over.
Thank you so much, sir.
So I think it's time to quit. Thank you very much. Best of luck. And thank you for the patient listening. Thank you for the patient listening. Okay, thank you very much. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
sir, yes,
Okay,
sir.
it is already 7 o'clock. So I conclude my discussion here on these important chapters today. That is on inequality, caste, class, political economy of development, then structure of growth, economy, poverty, etc., and finally the legislature. Okay. The other discussions we shall pursue tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you.